The Brian Mudd Show is on News Radio 610 WIOD.
All right, you know what else is huge? Some of the numbers that we have with the virus behind bars. Now, something that I have felt pretty strongly about from the onset, we should not be taking the opportunity of a pandemic to release prisoners early. I don't understand why we would have a crisis and then use that as an opportunity for people to get out of jail sooner than they otherwise would. Dr. Alex Del Carmen is joining us now. He's a corrections expert and a criminology professor at Tarleton State University. And Dr. Del Carmen, this has been a real point of contention all across the country, including right here in Florida. In fact, we just had a situation yesterday where we had a 21-year-old inmate who is booked on drug trafficking and racketeering and burglary. He was denied in Broward the ability to be released from prison despite having been tested positive with the virus. What are your thoughts about the way this is being handled across the country?
Good morning, and thanks for having me again. Sadly enough, for the rest of the United States, it has become a moral issue, an ethical issue, and a legal issue, right? From the standpoint that some people are looking at this saying, it's inhumane to keep them in prison if they, in fact, are sick and they're going to contaminate each other. On the other hand, society is saying, look, I don't want criminals to be walking down the street that are going to be released before their sentence is up. So unfortunately, it's bringing us to our knees in terms of what sort of a response do we give society and remain humane at the same time.
Well, I tell you what wasn't humane. So in Hillsborough, the county that's been most active in Florida on this note, they released 164 prisoners last week. The next day, one of those prisoners released was arrested for murder. And the sheriff who was culpable in the releasing of these prisoners, including the person detained for murder, said there's no question but that he utilized the opportunity to commit a series of crimes, including murder. And at what point do we talk about erring on the side of those who are not criminals versus erring on the side of those who are?
No question, right? And then the other part of that is, what does the Constitution say about their rights versus our rights as well, right? So the bottom line is there's going to be more and more crimes that are going to be committed for folks by folks that are going to be released from prison. There's no question. And sadly enough, people continue to be victimized, right? On the other hand, you also see the fact that, these prisons are absolutely overcrowded. And unfortunately, in the 80s and mid-80s to late 80s, we put a whole bunch of people in prison that are now elderly, and they're costing billions of dollars to taxpayers, and they are in that vulnerable population that the CDC says that one is more likely to have the disease. So it's really bringing a legal predicament to the criminal justice system as well.
So you're talking about kind of that next tier layer. For example, what types of infractions do we have evidence would be more permissible if we allowed these people out of prison? We've been told all of them are nonviolent, including the person who is now detained for murder in Hillsborough. So given that they are theoretically detained for nonviolent crimes, how do we know that what we're really releasing is somebody who won't commit additional crimes, including violent crimes?
Right, it's a great point, right? Because part of the problem is that what they're telling us is that these are nonviolent offenders, but in reality, what that means is that the criminal justice system prosecuted them for a nonviolent crime, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're nonviolent offenders. We know in the criminal justice system that there are people that go out there, commit a nonviolent crime and a violent crime, but the prosecutor may actually prosecute that person on a property crime because it's easier to get a conviction. So the bottom line is that we're going by official records. It doesn't really immunize that population and somehow say that they're nonviolent when in fact they could be, and they could simply turn around and commit a crime as the one you're citing.
Is there any kind of, I know with most things involving this pandemic, we don't really have a good comp for it, but is there any kind of precedent or is there any kind of situation that's happened previously that has potentially impacted this issue the same way?
Not at the same level, right? So we've seen overcrowding issues before. We've seen how some states are simply don't have the money to keep certain inmates. And so what they do is they turn them over and allow for more serious offenders to take place. In the history of corrections, we have seen a pendulum that shifts back and forth in terms of that, but not at the global scale and not in the way that we are seeing it today. Keep in mind, too, that this is the first time that we have a pandemic with social media aiding in terms of forming public perception and public opinion about this. So in the past, when we've had released They had to release inmates. We didn't know what exactly they did across the United States. Now, in a matter of a few minutes, we find out about it.
Well, and the other thing is we have data that shows that approximately 47% of criminals are repeat offenders. So approximately half of people that we would release, even if it's just normal times, let alone releasing people at a time of significant unemployment and economic hardship. If we already have that high of a predisposition towards, committing crimes, how is it easily justifiable by any of these authorities to put that into the situation?
Right. Not only that, but then you also are are sending that offender back to the same environment that actually forced that offender into the prison system. So at the end of the day, you're sending them back at a time when people are unemployed. In the past 45 days, we've had something like 20 million people file for unemployment in the United States, and then on top of that, folks are scared. There's a lack of resources, lack of jobs, lack of medical care, and then you're putting this person back in a strained environment, which is the environment that, contributed towards that person engaging in crime in the first place. So bottom line is, it's not smart. It's not the right time to do it. But I'm guessing that some of these correctional administrators don't really have an option at this point.
All right, we'll leave it there. Appreciate it. Dr. Alex Del Carmen. And you may follow at DC Consulting TX on Twitter.